I know it feels like forever ago that the Texans hired DeMeco Ryans, but it's only been less than a week, and there were still a few hanging issues out there. And I think Sean Payton put to bed at least one of them yesterday, which was this nagging little story about how maybe the Broncos had gone after DeMeco Ryans and they had to settle for Sean Payton. A lot of it started because of conflicting super nugget chasers. Ian Rappaport, reporting at the time, unbelievable. The Broncos spent today trying to hire DeMeco Ryans again today before he recommitted to the Texans, sources say. When he agreed to the terms of the Texans, they moved and finalized Sean Payton. Of course, Adam Schefter was not going to let that stand. He had to weigh in and clarify. The timing of today's two hires was completely coincidental. Broncos were zeroed in on Sean Payton and didn't make any contact this week with DeMeco Ryans or his agent. Denver was focused on Payton and Houston on Ryans. It's a regular Clarence Darrow versus William Jennings Bryan right there with those two. But it led to a whole lot of speculation about how much Denver actually wanted Sean Payton, not to mention how much did Sean Payton really want the Broncos and how much did they have to up the ante to get him. They were asked about this at the press conference yesterday. Somebody asked the panel, which consisted of Sean Payton, to his left, George Penner, the owner, and to Sean Payton's right, George Payton, the general manager. It gets kind of confusing, I know. Just listen to the words.
For Greg and George, there was a report shortly after that it came out that Sean was going to be the head coach here that said you were making a push for DeMeco right before that. Can you comment on that report?
I can comment. Yeah, that wasn't the case. Again, we met with a number of great candidates through the process, but once we locked in with Sean about 5 or 6 days before we got the trade done with the Saints, our focus was entirely on him and closing that.
Yeah, I would just say, Sean was more complicated than the others, obviously. We would have had Sean done earlier, right, if we didn't have that other layer of the trade.
So that's reasonable enough. If the Broncos did really want Sean Payton, yes, they had to trade for Sean Payton. For those of you who weren't really following because you were out on the Texans before they hired DeMeco Ryans, I get it. But because Sean Payton had retired/quit on the New Orleans Saints, the Saints still had his rights under his old contract. So any team that signed Sean Payton was first going to have to trade for his rights from the New Orleans Saints, and that was going to take a little bit of time. And Sean Payton went in and I think did a pretty good job of explaining the interview process, although maybe shedding a little bit of light on some reports about how Sean Payton may have been miffed a little bit about the way the Texans handled it. Just pay attention to his tone of voice here.
First day that I could be interviewed, the 17th, Greg, George, and Condi were there like breakfast time, the very first day. And I knew that meant something. Houston, we did a Zoom call. That was all of the process was fantastic.
Yeah, so it was awesome that Denver was there on the first day at breakfast time, bright and early. Congratulations to the billionaires being able to wake up before they sleep off their hangovers at 11 a.m. I don't know. But the reports were that the Zoom call with Sean Payton didn't go all that well. The Texans did a Zoom call with Payton because they weren't allowed to meet with him in person. So Payton, who, look, he's earned the right to have a pretty healthy ego, I suppose. And perhaps he felt like Denver had just gone out of their way more so than any of the other three teams that interviewed him, particularly the Texans, who chose to do it on Zoom, but they wanted to get the jump on it. Look, Boomer, this is the way things are done these days. I know maybe you're checked out for the most part those last couple years because you lost your binky in Drew Brees, but the Zoom call is no big deal. Didn't seem to be an issue for DeMeco Ryans, hottest young candidate there was there. Payton did explain some of the dynamics of this that make a lot of sense about just the complexities of everything.
This was the opportunity that I was interested in, and I know I was the coach they were interested in. Now, it was complex. So if any of you were involved in ownership and you were involved in trying to trade for a coach, certainly you would have a plan in place if those stakes were too high. I mean, I told Greg and George, here's the thing. They're making the trade, but it's like this trade impacts me, and if this trade is for this, then don't take it because I don't want to go if you lose that. Does that make sense? And so that's where these guys were fantastic.
That part was true, and we had talked about that beforehand. Payton is in this situation where he's talking to teams, and the teams are saying, hey, look, we got draft picks, we got these guys, we got that. But meanwhile, Payton, in his mind, has to think, okay, yeah, you have all those things, but if you give up some of them to get me, it's like an O. Henry story from back in the day. You guys remember that, right? You were paying attention in junior high. So it's that part was complicated. It didn't really strike to the heart of the matter, which was, hey, but did you guys actually really want DeMeco Ryans instead of me? Or was I your number one gal all along?
Yeah, if you're in that position, you're on the phone with everyone because at any time it might not work. And so I think DeMeco was probably talking with Lewis Hamilton or something because I was on the phone with these guys the whole time.
Okay, so Lewis Hamilton is one of the minority owners of the team. He's a Formula One driver. So a little bit of a joke there. I don't know how involved the Formula One driver is in the actual nuts and the bolts of hiring the coach and everything. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. And I don't think Payton is so arrogant that he would think that Payton and Penner wouldn't also maybe themselves be talking to DeMeco Ryans people. He concedes right there that, look, these things fall through all the time. If Payton found out that Penner wasn't keeping his options open, that would actually be another ironic reason for pause. You've got the draft elements where you don't want to cut off your nose to spite your face, but also this dynamic of, hey, if it's a smart ownership group like Payton thinks they are, then they should be keeping their options open. I think that makes the most sense. If you think about the Ian Rappaport tweet, it said that they tried to hire DeMeco away. I could very much see more drama. Don't get me wrong. If the Saints and the Broncos are going back and forth and trying to get this trade done, maybe there was a point where the Broncos said, all right, this is too much. That's it. We're going to go for DeMeco. Maybe that was enough to make the Saints panic. Maybe it was the other way around. I don't know. It seemed like DeMeco was committed to the Texans the entire time. Maybe Broncos realized that. I just don't think that it doesn't preclude the Broncos from originally and most wanting Sean Payton. So I don't think we have to get into a peeing contest about all of that. I still do desperately want to squash the Broncos into the turf over the next several years just because they had so many damn arrogant people from the Broncos organization, I'm guessing, who were leaking some of these reports, who almost acted as if, well, if the Broncos want DeMeco Ryans, the Broncos will get DeMeco Ryans. And I think it's pretty apparent at this point that DeMeco Ryans was going to go for the Texans first and foremost, and who knows what he would have done after that. But he set his sights on the Texans, and that's what happened. A little bit of a palate cleanser here because, frankly, the drama's gotten to me. I'm sick of the drama. This is from an article in The Athletic talking about people around the league and how they feel about the DeMeco Ryans hire. The Texans' hiring of DeMeco Ryans as coach has drawn rave reviews around the league. Ryans, who was previously the 49ers defensive coordinator, is incredibly respected by his peers and has been viewed as a rising star for years. People around the league were also happy Ryans negotiated a 6-year contract, which should incentivize the Texans to take a far more patient approach after back-to-back one-and-done coaches, just the third team to do that since the 1970 merger with their firings of David Culley and Lovie Smith. And I would remind everybody that the San Francisco 49ers were the last team to do that, and they haven't done so poorly. And also, the Texans, again, this continues to be reported like these were normal long-term hires. I don't know why. Someday, everybody will come around on the fact that, okay, the Texans had a bit of a pickle on their hands between Bill O'Brien and Jack Easterby running roughshod over the roster and the salary cap, not to mention Deshaun Watson holding everybody hostage. But we're moving on to happier times. J.J. Watt, beloved franchise icon, moving on to happier times, and he was on the Rich Eisen show and the Dan Patrick show. I'm guessing all as part of Super Bowl stuff here, and has a couple good appearances. You can tell he's very laid back. In the Rich Eisen show, he had his baby boy in his hands, and at times you could hear the little kid gurgling a little bit, or not gurgling. What's the word? Cooing a little bit, probably agitating to go out and do some box jumps or tire flips or something. But JJ talked about specifically why now is the time for him to retire.
Every single day is a mental grind and trying to make sure that you're the most prepared, trying to make sure that your recovery is the best. And even in January, February, you're already, stressing about making sure you're prepared for the next season. And those are the types of stresses and mental gymnastics that I was ready to be done with. I wanted to enjoy time with my son and my wife, to go through life and know what it feels like to just kind of relax a little bit. And if I miss a workout to play golf, then I miss a workout to play golf. And I don't have to worry, did I do the right thing today, or did I hurt my chances of having a good season?
And he described it pretty well right there. And JJ's not trying to be ungrateful for how awesome a job it is or anything, but particularly as you get into your 30s, I hate to overuse the word grind, but it's a grind. And we talked about this morning about, okay, is JJ a guy that could do the Linval Joseph or the Ndamukong Suh and come back in November to a team that's in the playoffs? And I think he could. I just don't know if he's wired to come in without having gone full bore 100% preparation mode in the offseason. I think that maybe around July or August, he'll be in shape, and he's been working out hard. He's just trying to do it in maybe a smarter way. Next time the Texans, oh boy, okay. All right, okay, I shouldn't go down this road. Next time the Texans are in playoff contention, and if it's this year, if they make just an incredible turnaround, like Sean Payton did with the Saints when everybody left them for dead after Katrina, could JJ come back and just be an edge rusher on a Texans team that actually made a push? A fella can dream, can't he? He also went on to talk about his Super Bowl pick. He was pressed into a prediction by Rich Eisen, and this is where he went.
I'm a D-line guy, so I'm going to go with the D-line. I started this conversation talking about the D-line, and I think that the Eagles' D-line is one of the most impressive I've seen compiled in one room together. So I'll ride with the Eagles in this one and see if they can pull it out. Dude,
the Eagles' defensive line is so freakishly good. If you look at the sack leaders in the league by team this year, they ended up 10 more than the second place team. They're really, really good. So I can appreciate what JJ is saying there. He did also go on to say that as much as he did just give a prediction, he was pressed into it, and he doesn't savor the thought of doing that if he decides to go into media.
On TV at some point and have to make a prediction like this, and they put the little graphic at the bottom where you pick your win.
Oh, yeah.
And then on Monday, every single fan comes back, oh, look at you, idiot. Look at this moron. He had no idea. No duh, I had no idea. If I had an idea, guess where I would be? The win in Las Vegas, putting every dollar I had on. I got no clue, just like you guys.
No duh, I had no idea. That's a quote right there. I'm going to use that in the Hall of Fame induction. So, yeah, JJ is also fresh off of a career where, you're looking for motivation and a chip on your shoulder at any given moment. And I don't know why, because now that I'm in the media and I think about how little guys really are invested in the picks that they give, because that, especially if you're using the spread, it's a coin flip if you're going with the spread. But yeah, as a player, you get insulted and offended, and you figure out ways that people have slighted you and wronged you. The Patriots have won multiple Super Bowls by being convinced that nobody thinks they're any good, because eventually someday J.J. Watt is going to choose against the Patriots, and Bill Belichick will have the Patriots worked up into a fervor over it. And that is just one of the many legitimate ways that Bill Belichick motivates his team. As far as that actual Hall of Fame induction, he was asked about going in with Tom Brady, who Dan Patrick said is he's kind of steal your thunder, right? He's on the Dan Patrick show now. We've moved on. We moved on to Dan Patrick.
I think it's cool to be retiring. We'll see at the same time as the greatest of all time.
So you think Brady will get in?
I think he's got a shot.
Okay. But
He's got some accolades.
What if Rodgers retires?
He will also make it, I think.
Okay.
I think he's going to make it too.
Where are you on the totem pole? Brady,
bottom.
Rodgers?
Yeah, no problem. You got to have a ring. I don't have one.
I thought that was cool, just because if I try to put myself in JJ's position, I might get a little bit sensitive about the whole no ring thing, just because JJ was awesome. He could have easily been a Reggie White if you were in the right place at the right time. That right there alone makes me feel like, okay, he might be a guy who stays retired just because he's very, very comfortable, not just with that, but I think as you see a little bit later in this interview, he's got a pretty good perspective on sports history in general, including, although he doesn't like people arguing with him on social media.
Those guys both got, I mean, Tom has more rings than any team in the
But he's okay, so he's talking about Tom Brady as the GOAT here.
NFL. I mean, it's literally insane. Like, anybody who tries to argue, like, my tweet to him after was like, greatest of all time, no debates, no arguments, and people tried to argue. I said, shut up. Like, just shut up. Like, you're an idiot.
Is he the greatest team player of all time in any sport?
I mean, that's a much more difficult argument because, I mean, you got guys with 11 rings. I mean, Bill Russell's an unbelievable, like, how do you quantify that?
Bill Russell, 11 rings. That's a good pull for somebody that didn't come in prepared for that specifically. At least, or if he was prepared for it, then he made it look like he wasn't, which is an even greater skill than actually pulling it out of the top of your dome. So I don't know. I think JJ goes into media in some way, shape, or form. I don't know if it's as a color commentator, studio show. I think he should just do a podcast or a YouTube channel or something. I think he'd be really good at that, doing interviews. And I think there are a lot of guys that looked at JJ, especially, when he was in his heyday and the very pinnacle of kind of the Captain America, John Cena phase of JJ Watt. These guys in the NFL right now are just young, impressionable teenagers with fat heads on their walls. So, I think the retirement's going to stick for JJ. And when I say that, I mean I think he's going to be okay with it. He's not going to be one of these guys that's super miserable and trying to figure out what he's doing with his life for a few years afterwards. It only took me like 7 years, okay? It took me about 7 years to figure it out. Hopefully we'll have some news of some coordinator hirings here very soon by the Houston Texans. I'm starting to get a little bit antsy. I'd like some movement. I don't want to wait forever and end up being left with the dudes that nobody else wanted to hire. But I've still got a lot of faith at this point. It's been a week, everybody. It's been a week since DeMeco Ryans was hired. All right, go forth and prosper.